Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Ayin Aleph. Less than a week left of Masechet Avodah Zarah. So let's dive right in. Hold on, I'm going to share my screen and we can really get started. I don't think I set it up yet, so hold on just a second. No, I did. So here we go. So where is it? Um, Okay, so here it is. We are at the Mishnah at the bottom of Ayin Amud Bet. So let's just dive right in. Boleshes shenichnas le'ir. Boleshes, Rashi tells us, Chayal al shem, that these are soldiers. Al shem shemichapsim v'chotrin kari lahu boleshes kidemetarkiman vayichapes ubalash. So that these are soldiers, and they're called that because they search and they break things, and the boleshes, the term boleshes is the Aramaic translation of vayichapes, that they are searching. So that's where the name comes from. So you've got these I translated them on the screen as marauding soldiers. So you have these marauding soldiers that entered a city. Bishas Shalom, if it was a peaceful moment, meaning that they weren't fighting hand-to-hand combat and fighting a war, well then chavios pesuchos asuros. Well then any open barrel you got to be worried about, because they may have drunk from it. Because what were they going around searching for and trying to get? They were looking to eat. They didn't necessarily feed the soldiers so well, so the soldiers took what they needed from the people who lived in the neighborhood. On the other hand, stumos mataros, if it's still closed, if it's still locked shut, well, then that probably means they didn't open it, they didn't touch it, and so as a result, you can still consider that kosher. B'shas milchama, but at a time of war, well, then they're busy. Elu ev elu mutaros, they're all permitted. Lefisha ein panai l'naseich, because they don't have time to engage in libations. They're busy fighting a war. So that is our Mishnah. Now, Tosos here asked an interesting question. Psukos asuros, when it came time to the when the open barrels during peacetime, and we say that they're prohibited, mashma afilu tuva. Which implies even if they opened many more barrels than they needed, right? Any barrel that was opened would be prohibited. Now we had seen earlier that when it came to barrels that were opened, if a general came to town with his soldiers, that he was going to, that if they open more barrels than they need to drink, then you actually can assume that they're still kosher. So this seems to be inconsistent. V'lo amrinan, but the answer is v'lo amrinan adaita de mamono paschu. Here we don't say that they opened it in order to get the money. Kida amrinan la'el, as we saw above with respect to the general. Gabi pulmusa, when it came to the general. V'hainu mishum, and now Tosfos explains why that's the case. The pulmusa, when it comes to the general, boim legabos mas. These are the king's men, and they are there to collect the tax. Hamas hamelech, v'arnona, and other kinds of taxes. V'lekach ika l'meimer. Therefore, that's why you can say da'adaita de mamona pasku, that they were not opening it in order to actually get wine from inside, but in order to see if there's any money there. Aval boleshes. But when it comes to the marauding troops, they're coming to drink, eat, drink, and make merry. So as a result, that's why you have to be worried about them, especially in peacetime. So that is Tosfos.
So
Now,
he thinks they're hiding money. The king thinks they're hiding money in the barrels.
that's exactly right. And so that's why when the king's general comes with his folks, if they are opening way more barrels than you need to drink, you can assume that they were actually not opening the barrels to drink, but instead opening the barrels to search for money. So, Urminu, 1 second, there's a Mishnah in Ketubot, Daf Kaf Zayin Amud Aleph, that seems to suggest a very different attitude. Again, Here, in the case of war, we say you don't have time for libations. But listen to the following: Ir kivashua karkom. If you have a city that was captured by a siege army, so then kol kohonot shebetocha psulot. All of the wives of Kohanim are going to be considered prohibited to their husbands. Why are they prohibited to their husbands? So Rashi reminds us, Kol hakonos hanimtsos betocha, that are found inside that city. Psulot levalehen, they are forbidden to be with their husband. The Ashes Kohen, that when it comes to the wife of a Kohen, asura af ba'onis, even if they, God forbid, are raped. This is different from a Yisrael, as we'll see in a moment, but the wife of a Kohen is not allowed to be with her husband. Meaning a Kohen can't stay with his wife if she has been, even if she's been violated, even if it were against her will. Aval Ashes Yisrael, but when it comes to a Jewish, a non-Kohen, lo, that's not the case. Loha. So haka deshas milchamahi. And so now we are asking, given that it's a time of war, ukatani asuros, and yet we say that they are prohibited, to yesh panai libaol. Obviously, there must be time to have relations. So you're saying that they don't have time to engage in libations, but they do have time for relations. So why do they have time for one and not the other? Well, you know what? It's the answer is pretty much what you'd expect. Amar Rav Mari says, panai. Yeah, you're right. There's no time for libations. Yesh panai. But to engage in relations, they'll make the time. So Tosos here notes, why don't we follow why don't we it looks like maybe we could answer a different answer. Uminu ir shekavshua karkom. So v'im tomar dilma hahi mairi la'achar gamar hamilchama da'az yesh lam panai. Maybe when it says that there's a city that was vanquished, we're talking about after the finishing of the vanquishing, and that's when the pillaging happened, and therefore that's when the wives of the Kohanim will be forbidden. So the Yesh Lomar, and so Tosfos explains, no, you can't say that. Demashma b'kol inyan. The implication of that Mishnah is that even before the war is over, afilu kodem gemara milchama, that in all cases, even before the war is over, the woman would be forbidden. And so as a result, that's why the Gemara does not choose to give that answer here. Okay.
So how can Tosfos say the Ash Yesh Lem Panai? They have Panai. Even in the middle of the Gemara, he says Lach Gemara Mechama the Ash Yesh Lem Panai. They would have Panai for relations, but not Panai for drinking wine or libations.
For libations, that's the answer. That's what Ramari says. Ramari says L'nesach ein Panai live all yesh Panai. That's exactly what Ramari says. That's exactly the point.
But I would think Tosfos would try to explain why one versus not another.
No, that's not what Tosfos is doing. Tosfos is explaining why it is that we don't answer, when it says that it was vanquished, it means after the war. Because remember, if it's not that's why our Mishnah said if during peacetime, you have to be worried. So they do have time during peacetime. And so why not say that we're just talking about in peacetime in both cases? And so so Tosfos is answering is that the Gemara clearly understands the Mishnah in Ketubot as being even during wartime. And so as a result, that's why they can't answer it. And that's why instead we just say that there's a difference. Basically, there's a difference between libations and relations. Okay, so the next Mishnah, it's important to note the Aleph there for the Hagod Habach. It changes it. Instead of Ha'umnin Shel Yisrael, it should be Umanin Yisrael, workers who are Jewish. So you have Jewish workers, Sheshalach lahem Ovid Kochavim Chavis Shel Yain Nesech Bischaran, who have their boss, who's not Jewish, who's an idolater, sends them a barrel of Nesech wine, of Yain Nesech, as their wage, as their income. So muter lomar tain lanu estameha. So they are able to say to their boss, listen, don't give us the barrel, give us the money, sell the barrel and give us the money instead. Give us how much it's worth. However, Mishnah Nechnas Alir Shusan, but if that barrel has come into their possession, meaning while it's in transit, so they can still say this. But as soon as they have possession of that barrel of Yayin Nesech, too late, Asur. They can't return it. It's prohibited. There's nothing that they can do about it. As Rashi says, Mutter lo marlo tein lanu estameha, dahalo kanula, because at that moment, the Jewish workers had not yet acquired the Yayin Nesech. V'hu eino chayiv lahen elamos. And he is not obligated to give them wine. He's just giving them the wine instead of money. He's obligated to give them money. Vitanya Le'el. Okay, see you later. Vitanya Le'el. And we saw earlier, that back a couple of days ago, about a week ago, Daf Samach Daled Amud Aleph, Yisrael Shenosha Ba'obed Kochavim, that if you have a Jew who's trying to collect money from an idolater, mana $100, 100 zuz, machar avodas kochavim, yayin nesech vehevi lo mutter. The idolater can sell the yayin nesech and bring the money to him, and it's permitted. The only thing that can't happen is you can't have the idolater say, "Oh, I'm going to go sell my idol and bring it to you." That would be prohibited. But when it comes to, but if he just goes ahead and sells it without telling you, it's totally fine, because in his possession, it's totally fine. And so as a result, similarly, here, we're going to say, as long as the money hasn't gotten here, you can say, listen, go give us money instead. What I don't think you could say is go sell this and exchange it for the money. You could just say, give us the money instead. Okay, so Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Mutter la'adam lomar la'ovid kochavim. So a Jew, Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, that a Jew is able to say to a non-Jew, to an idolater, Tzei v'hafeis alai minas hamelech. Go and satisfy for me the king's portion, meaning I owe the money to the king, and you help me and take care of it. Rashi explains the details. Tzei v'hafeis alai minas hamelech. Arnona, this is a tax. Shahayu notnin mitvuosehen umibehemosehen. This is essentially like a head/property tax that comes from the grains, from the things that grow, and from their animals. And take a look at the letter Dalid, where it says ha'ishur lamelech. That is like a tithe to the king. V'yisrael zeh shechayev latet lamelech yayin. And this Jew that is obligated to now give to the king wine, mutter lomar lo v'kochavim hafeis alai. He can say to the idolater that you should, can you please take care of my debt? Even though this idolater is now going to give yayin nesech to the king. V'ha Yisrael hu parei dameh. And the Jew will obviously pay him back its value. Kevan dahavim matzi l'saluke l'shlicha demalka bezuze. Since the idolater could have gotten out of the whole situation by just giving money to the king, ki yav le ovid kochavim, and the Jew could have done that. Ki yav le ovid kochavim yayin nesech. When the non-Jew, when the idolater gives the yayin nesech, lav shluchei di Yisraelhu. He's not really the messenger of the Jew. If he had been the messenger of the Jew, as we will see in a moment, it would be problematic. So Meisvei, 1 second, I have another case where it seems to say that you can't do this. You can't ask a non-Jew to cover your portion. Meisvei al yomar adam la'ovid kochavim. You shouldn't say to an idolater, ul tachtai la'otzer. Go in my stead to the ruler. So as a result, in that case, we say it's prohibited. So Amrle Rav. So, and how can you say that? How could Rav have said the other statement? That they're basically the same statement. One time you can be and you can have an idolater in your stead, and in the other time you can't. So what's the difference? So Amrle Rav Ol Tachtaila Otzar Karmart, you're telling me about, that you should enter in my stead to the ruler? Hello, Damya. That's not the comparable case to our case of go satisfy for me the king's portion. That Elalaha. Take a look at the next case, which is the next case in that brisa. Aval Omer lo malteni min ha'otzer. You can say, save me from the ruler. So you can't say, be in my place. Be in my place is a language of agency. And so you've effectively made the idolater your agent. But you can say, save me or pay my debt. Those you can say. So Ol Tachtai Kamrat, as Rashi explains, we're now opposite the letter bet in parentheses that is in the Gemara on the right hand side of the page. It's in the narrow lines of Rashi. Ol Tachtai Kamart Kavan to Amrle Ol Tachtai. Since you said go in my place, that you should in my stead. Havi mashma, havi bimkomi. It's implying that you should be fully in my place. V'komai de yahivle ovikochavim, and anything that the non-Jew gives to the king, havi ki'ilu Yahweh Yisrael. It's as if the Jew gave it. Dehabim komohu, because he's in his place. And so as a result, if he gives Yayin Nesech, it's going to be a problem. You're benefiting from the Yayin Nesech. So, but when it comes to the case of our case, the Rav Yehuda, when it's Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rab that you can say Seva Hafez Alai Al Minas Hamelech Lo Damya El Seva. That's not comparable to the case that we just quoted from the Brisa. Rather, it's comparable to the end of the Brisa. Aval Omer Lo Malteni Mina Otzer De Efsher L'Saluke Bezuze. Because again, in that situation, you could satisfy everything by giving money. Hilkach L'Mesav Le Chamra Lav Shluchehu. And so as a result, if the idolater chooses instead to give Yayin Nesech, that's up to the idolater. He's not your agent. Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah. And so sorry for not scrolling. And so the next Mishnah says, addresses the sale of wine to an idolater. So hamocher yeno le'ovid kochavim. You have to be careful when you sell wine to an idolater. Pasak ad shalom madad. If you set the price before it all gets measured out, damav mutarin. Well, then it's good. You can keep the payment that the non-Jew has paid you. But madad ad shalo pasak. If you measure it out, and we'll see exactly what the situation is in the Gemara. Damav asurin. Well, then the money is going to be prohibited. And Rashi helps us out. We'll take a look at the two Rashis on the Mishnah. Hamocher yeno le'ovid kochavim pasak imo ma'os. You set aside the amount of money ad shalom madad before the measurement happened. Damav mutarin. That money is permitted to the Jew. Mefarish b'Gemara. We'll explain Taima. We'll explain the reasoning in the Gemara. Ika demoki, that there are some who say demoki la mishum meshicha ba'ovid kochavim kana, that when the non-Jew takes possession of the wine, that's his acquisition of the wine. And hilkach keshemoded hainu meshicha. And so the measuring, which is done in presumed the containers of the non-Jew, so then that is going to be the moment of the transfer. V'kanya ovid kochavim miyad. And so as a result, the non-Jew gets the property of the wine immediately. Dahavale liyisrael zuze gabi de ovid kochavim. And so the result is that it's as if there's money that the non-Jew owes the Jew, behalva, as a loan. Yayin nesech lo havi ad nagabe, and it's not yayin nesech until it actually touches him, until he touches it. So as a result, in the that's why if you set aside the price ahead of time, everything's okay. But madad ad shelo pasuk damav asurin. But if you in fact measured it before you set aside the price, de ovid kochavim lo kanya b'mashicha, that in that case the mashicha doesn't help us. because even though he's effectively taken possession of the wine, because the price has not been set, there's no meeting of the minds. The kaven de lo pasuk damav lo samcha daite. There is no meeting of the minds. Hilkach kinagabe. So as a result, when he touches it, havi yayin nesach, it becomes yayin nesach immediately, but the Yisrael, but it belongs still to the Jew, and therefore okay, and therefore it's going to be prohibited. V'ika demoki la. And there's an opinion that we are going to see shortly that says that the money was already paid by the non-Jew, and that's the case because some people are there's going to be a disagreement. We're going to see it. There's a disagreement about whether Mashiach works for a non-Jew. That is the fundamental discussion of our of the Gemara now. Again,
could we say then that if the store owner already puts the bottle wine in bottles and they're on the shelf, and the goy comes in and wants to buy it, that's already measured, and it wouldn't be a problem for him to sell it?
It would not only yes, yes. But I mean, there are additional situations. There's additional protections there because the bottles are closed,
right,
and
right,
sealed. So
right.
you also have additional protection. But what you're highlighting is you're exactly right. Even if those bottles were open, given that the price is on the shelf, you could say that it's totally permitted for the as soon as as long as there's a sign that says you pick it up, you bought it, right? It's something along those lines. You touch it, you bought it. Then that's exactly right. So now we're going to have a machlokas between Ameimar and Rav Ashi.
I don't think you have to say that. I'm thinking that if the bottles are on the shelf behind the store owner, like in a liquor store, maybe you can't touch them. And he says the price is $6.99 for that bottle. And he says, I want that bottle. He's already, in a sense, when he points to it,
yes,
maybe that's
agree
enough.
with that. I agree. That could also be a similar case. 100%. Okay, so Amar Amemar. Amemar says Mashicha ba'over kochavim kona. That actually the Mashicha is what makes the acquisition. And again, at some point, he's going to bring our Mishnah as evidence of that fact, but we are going to end up explaining our Mishnah in two different ways, as Rashi has highlighted. So, and how do I know that? Teda dahani parsoi mishadre pardashni lahadadi velo hadri bahu. And I know that this is the case because the Persians send pardashnai, and pardashnai, take a look at Rashi, third line down from where the Gemara begins on Rashi. Doron, these are presents. They send these presents and they never take them back. But if in fact it's only maos kanos, that only the transfer of money causes a transaction, well then people would be allowed to take back presents because there's been no definitive transaction. So that is the position of Ameimar. Rav Ashi says, I disagree. Rav Ashi Amar, no, la'olam eimalach, really, I could tell you, Mashiach ba'ovikol chavim eina kona. Really, it doesn't work. V'hai lo hadri bahu, and that they don't go back. That's because they have a sense of haughtiness. They don't want to, they're too proud to take back their presents. Okay, so now we're going to have four different efforts to see if we can prove whether Ameimar is correct or Rav Ashi is correct. We're going to have three of them today, and the fourth and final one that will actually be a successful proof, and we will see which direction we prove it in. That will wait for tomorrow. So, Amar Rav Ashi, Mina Mina La, how do I know that I'm right, that in fact it's Mashiach does not work for an idolater? So somebody not Jewish. So Rav told these wine sellers, when you set aside wine, when you measure out wine for the idolaters, Shaklu zuze minayu v'hadar kailan lahu. You got to make sure you get the money first. Okay, and if they don't have money with them, give them money, lend them money. v'hadar shekilu minayu, and then take that money back as the payment. So as a result, it's all a loan to them. Because if you don't, because then if you don't do that, when the non-Jew touches the wine, you could end up with yayin nesach in your possession. And when you eventually get money for it, demei yayin nesach. So you end up taking money for yayin nesach, and that money is prohibited to benefit from. So now Rav Ashi, so that was the statement of Rav, and now Rav Ashi says, and if you tell me that Mashiach works, well, why did Rav need to make this statement? As soon as the non-Jew takes the property of it, he owns it. And yayin nesach lo habi ad, and it doesn't become yayin nesach until he touches it, which doesn't happen right away. So idika ka'ayel kayel v'rami lamana d'Yisrael. So no, that's not a proof, because if in fact the all of the measurement happened in a container for that the Jew owned, hachinami, you're absolutely right that if Rav made the statement in connection with measuring in the Jewish merchants' own containers, then you're right, it would be a proof to you, Rav Ashi. But lo tzricha de ka'ayel v'rami lamana de ovid kochavim. No, it can be where the situation is that it's in the utensils of the idolater. And in the utensils of the idolater, as soon as the wine touches the bottom of the container, there's already wine that's there. So as a result, and the wine that's there is yayin nezech, and so as a result, the whole thing becomes yayin nezech, and that's going to be a problem. Well, one second, so now again, Rav Ashi responds back, hey, in the end, kimatul avira demana kanye. Don't focus on when it gets to the bottom of the container of the non-Jew. It becomes the non-Jews even in the airspace of the container. And so given the fact that became the non-Jews even in the airspace of the container, that's before it became yayin nezek, because it's before it hit the ground and it hit the bottom of the container where the pre-existing wine already was. And so as a result, maybe that does show that Rav is saying, like Rav Ashi points out, that Mashiach doesn't work. Because if in fact Mashiach did work, well then as soon as it's in the airspace of the container, it should belong to the non-Jew. And that's before it became yayin nesech. And so everything works. So everything works according to me, Rav Ashi says, but not according to you, Amemar. So, right. And so as a result, according to you, Amemar, given the fact that Rav is concerned about it, Shmamina Nitzo Chibur. This shows that it must be that the stream of wine that goes from the bottom where it's touching the other wine all the way up through the opening and into the barrel of the Jewish merchant who's pouring the wine into the container of the idolater, that because of that flow connection, we're going to say that even the wine that remains in the barrel will all become prohibited. So isn't that what really Rav is telling? And there's a problem with that, because we don't say that the stream makes a connection. So the Gemara says, no, you don't have to say that the stream makes a connection. You're right. If the non-Jew was holding his container, well then, as soon as it goes into the airspace of the container, hachinami, you're right. It would be considered him lifting the container, and as a result, the wine would be his even before it hit the bottom of the container, and even before it became yayin nesech by touching the other yayin nesech. So lo tricha de manach ara, but we're talking about where the container was on the ground. One second though, if you're telling me that the non-Jewish buyer's container is on the ground and you're pouring into it and it doesn't belong to the non-Jew immediately when it goes into the airspace of the container, particularly kelav, and if you're telling me that it's the non-Jewish container, shamat mina, kelyo shel lokeach bershus mocher lo kana lokeach. This seems to show that in fact a vessel that belongs to the buyer and you put something in it, the seller puts something in it in the seller's courtyard, that it doesn't immediately belong to the buyer. But we say, in fact, it would be a proof that that would be the case. And yet, Rashi tells us, second line of the Rashi on Ayin Aleph Amabet, Shamat Mina, Va'anan, Ibuye Ibailan Ba'amochar Asfina. In Baba Basra Daf Pei Hayam and Bet, we ask the question of whether or not it's true that the vessel of a buyer takes possession in the property of the seller. And since we are unsure, it can't be that this is a proof. So you're right, it's not a proof. La'olam emalach kana lokeach. Really, you're absolutely right. The buyer makes the acquisition as soon as the product gets into his container. And here's our case. That in fact, in the mouth, at the edge of the mouth, is still some wine of the idolater that exists. And so as a result, as soon as the wine goes to the very opening of the mouth of the container of the non-Jew, then it becomes yayin nesech. So even before it goes into the airspace of the container, and therefore it's yayin nesech before it transfers to the idolater. And therefore, if you haven't already set the price and set everything up, it's going to be a problem. The kama insechle. So every moment it's going to cause a problem. And so that's why you need to have set the price up ahead of time, according to Rob. You need to effectively have done the transaction. Ukaman, but 1 second, who is this like? Doloka Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. It seems like what you're saying is not consistent with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, because we are going to see Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel say in a Mishnah on Ayin Dalet Amabet, I think on Ayin Dalet Amabet. Let me just make sure. Hold on. Yeah, on Ayin Dalet Aleph, excuse me. Dei Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Ha'amar yemacher kulo la'ovdei kochavim chutz midmei yayin nesach shabo. That when you have a mixture of yayin nesach and kosher wine, what can you do? You don't lose the whole thing.
Right.
What you can do is you can sell the kosher wine within the mixture to a non-Jew, and then the non-Jew can get the whole thing. So the non-Jew gets the whole bottle, but you sell him half the bottle, which is half kosher. So that doesn't that and we paskin like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, as Rashi points out, Delo ka Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the Ketani Masnisin, because we still learn in a Mishnah, and the Chet tells us it's L'kaman Ayin Daled Amid Aleph, Yayin Nesek Shenafel Labor. If you have Yayin Nesek that falls into a cistern, Kulo Aser, it all becomes prohibited. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, and Rabbi Shimon says no. Yemachar kulo, you can sell the whole thing, la'ovdei kolchavim, to a non-Jew, chutz midemei yayin nesek, except for the value of the yayin nesek that shabo, that fell into it. Alma mishum ta'rovas yayin nesek lo mitzar hana. So as a result, we see that when yayin nesek comes into something, it doesn't create a prohibition of benefiting from the chamra de Yisrael, from the Jewish wine. Va'anan kimlan Kol makom shishana Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel b'mishnah teinu halacha kamoso, and we have a general principle that the halacha is like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. So how can it be that this is not consistent with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? Because Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel would say that you would be allowed to participate, to sell the wine, and so
How do you
even
calculate it?
What?
How do you know how much is Jewish wine? How much is
Well, in our case, it would be very easy because remember, the whole point of this is that the seller is measuring out into the container of the non-Jew the amount of wine. And so as a result, 99.9% of the wine is going to be Jewish wine. And so as a result, it's not even very much that's going to be. So it's not going to be really a problem to figure out how much, because how much is the little drops that are going to be left that are causing the problem? It's almost nothing. The vast majority of it. So you take off a nickel or a dime or whatever, a quarter, whatever you need to take off. You take off a little bit. That's not going to cause a problem. So doesn't this show that this is a whole problem? In which case, the whole answer is way easier if we just say that Mashiach doesn't work. Well, then the whole problem goes away. So midihu taima el Rav. No, no. And second, you're saying this whole thing is a problem according to Rav? Rav understands Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel differently. Ha'amar Rav halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel chavis b'chavis. No, when we say that the halacha in that Mishnah is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel with respect to mixtures, it is not when the wine itself mixes. It is only if you've got a 1 barrel of yayin nesech mixed up with a bunch of barrels of good wine. Then you can sell all of the barrels, and you can accept for and take away the value of 1 barrel.
Oh.
But when it comes to avalo yayin b'yayin, but the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel when it comes to a mixture of wine and wine. And so as a result, now we can understand Rav, and everything is good. And therefore, the bottom line is that Maimar has now offered a reasonable interpretation of Rav's statement that is consistent with Mashiach being Kona for an Ovid Kochavim. And so that is the end of proof number 1. And
how do we get to one question there? You said earlier, I think I heard, that if one was pouring from the non-Jews into the barrel of the Jews and then selling it again, what was he pouring? Where was that yayin nesek? This was before the drops on the side. This was earlier on.
No, remember, it's not the non-Jew pouring into the Jew's container. It's the Jew pouring into the non-Jew. The Jew is the merchant here. So the Jew is pouring into the non-Jew's container, and the understanding at the beginning was that the drops of yayin nesek are at the bottom of that container.
Why? How'd they get there?
Because it's the non-Jew's container.
Oh, so he didn't wash it out, I guess. So he didn't.
Exactly. No, you didn't want exactly. Okay, so question. We now again question Maimar, and we say Meisvei halokeach garutaos shmin ha'ovdei kochavim. You can buy, if you buy scraps of silver from an idolater, umatza behen avodas kochavim, and you happen to find in that group of scraps an idol. Im ad shalom nasan maos mashach. If you've already taken the possession, and if before you've given the money, you took possession, yachzir, you know what? You can return it. You can return the idol and deduct its value from the purchase price, because you're buying it's based on weight. You're buying the metal. Im mishin nasan maos mashach. But if you've already given the money and now you've taken possession, too late. Yolach liyam hamelach. You have to throw it into the Dead Sea. And Isal Mashiach ba'ovid kochavim kona. But 1 second, if you think that Mashiach makes a kinyan when you're dealing with a non-Jew, amay yachzir. How can he return it even in the first case? Even in the first case, he's already taken possession of it. And so that's going to be problematic. So Amar Abaye explains, no, Mishum demechze kimekach tos. No, it's a mistaken transaction. It looks like a mistaken transaction, and that's why you're able to undo it. But 1 second, Amar Rabba, Reisha mekach tos, Seifa la mekach tos. 1 second, it's the same mekach tos, whether or not the guy gave the money ahead of time. That doesn't actually explain it. So as a result, Rava offers an alternative explanation Ella Amarava Reisha V'Seifa Mekaktos. In both cases, it's a mistaken transaction. The Reisha, and in the first case, Delo Yav Zuze, when you didn't yet give the money, Lo Mitchazi Ka Avodas Kochavim Biyad Yisrael. It doesn't look like a Jew selling an idol to a non-Jew because the Jew hasn't given the money to the non-Jew. So as a result, he's just giving back to the non-Jew something that belongs to the non-Jew. But Seifa, in the latter case, the Yahev Zuzi, when he gave the money already, Mitchazeh Kavodas Kochavim B'Yad Yisrael. Well, he's wanting a rebate. And when the money comes back, when the person gives the idol, when the Jew gives the idol to the idolater, and now the idolater gives the money back to the Jew, that looks like, for all intents and purposes, it looks like the sale of an idol by a Jew to a non-Jew. So even though it really isn't, because it's a mekaktos, because it was a invalid or mistaken transaction, so even so, we're going to be strict in that situation and say you can't do it if the money has already changed hands, but you can do it if the money has not. Okay, so that was challenge number 2. Challenge number 3. So Amar Le Mar Kashisha braid the Rav Achista le Rav Ashi. So Mar Kashisha says to the son of Rav Achista says to Rav Ashi. So now the challenge is not of Amemar, but it's rather of Rav Ashi. And we're trying to now show that, hey, doesn't the following show that in fact Mashiach does work? Tashma. If you sell your wine to an idolater, pasak ad shalom madad, if you set the price before you measured, this is our Mishnah, dama mutar, and the money is all permitted. V'i amra meshicha ba'ovid kochavim ein akona, and if you now say to me that the money, that meshicha doesn't work, amai dama mutarin, why is the money permitted? So because you haven't necessarily given the money, and so as a result, because all you've done is set the price. It's not as if the money has changed hands. Unlike when Rav talked about it, when we saw the case of Rav, the very first question, the money had changed hands. Here, the money didn't change hands. So the Gemara, Rav Ashi answers, to actim lay dinar. The guy already gave some of the money. So as a result, the money that he gave at the very beginning, that is what enables the transaction to be a valid transaction. 1 second though, ihachi ema seifa. What about the end of our Mishnah? Madad ad shalo pasak. If you measure before you set aside the price, damav asurim. Well, then the value, the price, whatever money you get, is going to be prohibited. Ve'i dekadim lain dinar. But if in fact the idolater already paid the guy a dinar, meaning it gave him a down payment, well then if we say ma'os kanos, that money is creating the acquisition, because everybody agrees that money creates an acquisition. Everybody agrees that at least on some level, when the Jew gets the money, if everything is set aside, well then it's the non-Jew has acquired it. Amai dam avasurin. Why should the money be prohibited? So Amar Le, Rav Ashi says, Uldidach. But according to you, who says Mashiach does work, Amai Reisha Dama Mutar and Besefa Dama Basurin. Why is the money permitted in the first case and not in the second case? You still have the same Mashiach in both cases. Elamai Islach Lamemer. What are you going to tell me? You're going to tell me Pasuk Samcha, Pasuk. I mean, if they set aside the price, Samcha Daite. Well, then everybody, you got a meeting of mind, and as a result, it's all set aside and the deal is done. Lo pasuk, lo samcha daite. And if you didn't set aside the price, set a price, well, then you didn't have a meeting of the minds, and therefore you're not going to have the Mashiach work. So just as you say that with respect to Mashiach, that essentially you need to have a meeting of the minds along with the Mashiach, and if you don't have that, it's not going to be a transaction. L'dinami. So for me, the same thing. Afal gav de kadim le dinar, even though the guy already gave him the first dinar, and usually Mos Kanos, if Pasuk Samcha Daita, when you have a set price, well then when you gave that coin, when the non-Jew gave the coin, everybody knew that it was going to be a good deal. Lo Pasuk, but if they didn't set aside the price, Lo Samcha Daita, they didn't have a meeting of the minds, and therefore it's not going to be a good deal. And so as a result, we now have two approaches to our Mishnah. Amemar says that the approach is that Mashiach performs a kinyan for an idolater, and an idolater has not yet paid in our Mishnah. And Rav Ashi says, no, Mashiach does not constitute a kinyan for idolater, but he has already paid at least some of the money. So we have one more challenge to see which of these approaches is correct. But for that challenge and the outcome, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf.
So according to one of them, I forget which one, you need to set the you need to set the measurement and the price. It's not sufficient just the measurement, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely. The point is that the measurement is the moment of Mashiach according to Amemar. But everybody agrees that if you don't set the price ahead of time, you're going to be in trouble. It's consistent. That's our Mishnah. That's Rav. All of that is consistent. You need to set the price, because if you don't have the price set, whatever method you're going to say is the method of transaction, whether it's the paying of the money or the picking up and taking of the possession, in both cases, when you don't have that meeting of the mind, that act of acquisition doesn't work, because there's no meeting of the minds. There's no sense of, oh, I'm definitely acquiring this, because maybe you're not acquiring it.
So if it's he says it's $5.99 for a liter. Now he hasn't even poured in the wine from the barrel into the liter bottles, but they know that that's the price. Once I pour it, then it'll be. But it's the price.
Exactly. And so then it makes a difference. If you're according to Amemar, where Mashiach works, even if there's been no money transferring, as soon as the wine goes into the bottle, the possession has transferred, and essentially the price has been set, and so everything is perfect, and so as a result, it's all going to be okay. And according to Rav Ashi, no, everything is true what I just said, except the non-Jew must give a money beforehand, because Mashiach is not enough for a transaction. And so our Mishnah is talking about where some money has already changed hands.
Even if it's a down payment.
Even if it's a down payment.
He could pay, he says, I'm giving you $1, and I'll give you the other $5 tomorrow.
Exactly. 100%. 100%. Shkoch. Have a great day. Looking forward to continuing our learning together as we finish Maseches Avodah Zarah. Talk to you later. Be well.